My name is Jonnie and I've made an album using only noises from my kitchen. It's called Kitchen Sink. There are 10 tracks on the album. Each track focuses on a specific kitchen appliance or utensil. The reason the whole project came about in the first place and the recording process can start to be explained by looking at the first track, which is called More Oven Than Not. The oven in my kitchen at the time produced a very pleasing thud when you shut the oven door, and at some point I thought I really want to use that as a kick drum in a track. When I set up to record it, I thought I can probably do an entire track just from sounds in this kitchen, and that idea for one track just escalated into a whole album. So I used the function and temperature dials on the oven as percussion because they made nice clicky noises, and I took a wire vegetable rack and played that with brushes like they were cymbals on a drum kit. The oven's timer beep became the melody because once you've got a beep you can pitch it to any note you like. For example, the oven timer beep looks like this and sounds like this, and if I squash that it'll go up in pitch and sound like this, and if I stretch it out it'll go down in pitch and sound like this. And because I'm stretching and squashing the sounds on this album so much, you get all kinds of weird character that you might not get if you were doing that with proper instruments, because the tones they produce are probably a lot purer. They've evolved like that over the years of instrument making. So the timer beep also set the tempo for the track. That's a big part of the album, pitching beeps all over the place, but also letting the natural rhythms of the machines govern the rhythms of the tracks. The washing machine has these great ratchet style dials on them, which you can hear me twisting a lot during the track just because they made for great little kind of rhythmic fills. And I also used some clicks and clunks from the dishwasher because it was right next to it and it's kind of in the washing category. But since neither of those machines produce any kind of beep, I used a wine glass to generate a tone. You must have seen someone do this before. There you go. Anyway, I pitched that note all over the place. And the kick drum in this track is an upside down wok pan with the handle taken off and just stamping on it. And obviously you'd be forgiven for thinking that's just me adhering to the kitchen sounds concept, but I've actually been using that wok pan like that for years. You can hear me talk about it at the start of my song Crumbs on the album Trapped in Amber, where I say, better get my shoe on. Put my shoe on. Gotta get that nice bass drum sound. And that's because if you're not wearing a shoe, when you stamp on it, it's not going to sound as good. This track is entirely made up of glass bottles. I'm either blowing across the top of them, or I'm clinking them together, or tapping on them. And I used loads of different types and sizes of bottle just in case it affected the tone. I don't know if it did, but I did it anyway. I did find that when you're blowing across the top of the bottle, there is this inevitable amount of attack at the start of each note. And from just messing around with the recordings, if you chop off that attack, you chop off the start of the waveform, then it almost sounds like a viola being plucked or something. The high organish sound at the end is a recording of clinking together that gets shorter and shorter and shorter until you have this just like constant note that I could play on a keyboard. And at the end, the loop is actually getting longer and longer, so it kind of sounds like a spinning plate coming to rest, but instead of speeding up at the end, it slows down. It's really weird. This track centres around a bread maker, and that bread maker produces a beep, so that's most of your melodic parts taken care of. You can hear it churning away throughout the track, and it occasionally stops, I'm assuming to let the dough rest. And so I used this kind of starting and stopping as cues for when things should start and stop in the track, just because that's part of the whole concept of the album, letting the natural rhythm of the appliance influence the track. The creepy notes that you hear are actually from a bin, where we had this pedal bin in the kitchen where every time you stood on it, the lid would open and hit off the wall, and it would make a sound like a gong. And I knew I wanted to use that on the album because I thought it was kind of funny. It sounded like a dinner gong. You know, it was like this grand announcement every time we put something in the bin. The beat in this track is made entirely from wooden spoons, just hitting them together in different ways, and all the tones come from pot lids. If you tap a pot lid and hold it up to your ear, it'll kind of hum for ages. And so I took a recording of that and pitched it to 3 different notes that I thought sounded good together. And obviously if I'm pitching up, the recording's going to get shorter. If I pitch down, the recording's going to get longer. And however long or short the clips were at those pitches, I just looped them like that. So they're kind of, it's not random, but it changed the way I composed the whole piece because it took the decision about when another hit should happen out of my hands. The oven in my current house is a gas oven, and when you turn it on, a spark fires regularly until the gas lights and the oven's on. If you like the hob, it's a different spark and it's a lot quicker, but the oven spark still fires at its normal rate, so you get this. Except it's not as fixed as that. You don't get like 4 hob sparks for every oven spark. If you think of the hob spark as being like a hi-hat and the oven spark is like the snare, then the hi-hat is wandering all over the snare's kind of grid. And across the course of a couple of minutes, this produces a lot of push and pull, which is kind of the central focus for the whole track. For melody, I recorded one of the gas hobs whining. You know, if you kind of set the flame to a certain intensity, you get this really high-pitched whine. So I recorded that and processed it and pitched it about all over the place. And also, the oven has a timer which beeps, so just like in the first track, I used that beep to create some of the melody. But it's a different oven, it's a different beep. Fair game. Percussion-wise, I laid out a bunch of cake tins and oven dishes and played them with barbecue skewers for 2 reasons. One being that it seemed a bit more on topic, and 2, I didn't want to put loads of dents in all our cake tins and oven dishes with real drumsticks. The backbone for this track comes from a wind-up egg timer, which I recorded twice, and in the second instance I've squashed it to double time. There's another kind of dark organish sound which comes from hitting a biscuit tin, and the lead line is more pot lid goodness. Although I did have to record that solo in chunks because I couldn't play the whole thing start to finish. I'm not that good on the keys. And there's also a mixing bowl, which was a great source of sound because it varies in thickness from top to bottom, so you get different sounds hitting it in different places. And that's that one. The sound of the fridge freezer is on pretty much all the tracks. There was no way to get around that without turning it off, which I really didn't want to do. It's quite a fancy one, and I was worried I might not be able to get it back on properly again. So the tones in this track come from the beep that would sound whenever you left the fridge door open for longer than 30 seconds. And I pitched those beeps right down, stretched them right out, and then fed the whole thing through an analog delay unit. And I purposely didn't clean up the clips because I liked the way they sounded once they'd been through the delay. They were a lot softer. I used software in which I couldn't really tell what pitches, what notes I was achieving with the pitches, because I wanted to make the whole thing a bit less intuitive. You know, it wasn't like playing it on a keyboard where your fingers might naturally go to where they're used to going. So I did the whole thing by ear. And it's definitely the most ambient track on the album with no beats in it at all. But I quite like that because the fridge itself isn't a kind of clicky clunky thing. It's just always there in the background, humming away. I don't drink coffee, this is tea, but halfway through making this album, my wife got a Swiss coffee maker that emits all kinds of noises, so I had to drag that into things. When you turn it on, it makes a kind of 4-part clunk that I thought would be the obvious starting point, and I thought I would build a rhythm around that. But once I'd recorded every noise I could seemingly make with the machine, it was the sound of the beans grinding that I found most interesting. Like I was saying about the extreme squashing and stretching of sounds, the raspy quality of this noise, once I pitched it, was just too good not to be the main focus of the track. So I found 4 pitches at which that rasp sounded particularly good, and I built a melody with those notes. All the percussion is actually this same sound, but it's just pitched up a lot higher, and I'm just doing very quick stabs on the keyboard. So in that sense, it's one of the most pure tracks on the album because every single sound came from the coffee maker. It's not like I tapped out rhythms on coffee cups or something to add to it. There's not even any walk kick drum on this. The buttons on the microwave all make the same beep, so it's not like I was playing out the melody on the controls like you might imagine me doing on a telephone keypad. I was just taking that one beep and pitching it all over the place, using different methods as well to try and get more results, which I think I got quite a lot of mileage out of that one beep on this track. Percussion wise, the wok pan's all over it, and there's also butter knives. Hitting butter knives together is what's producing that kind of high triangle-like sound near the end of the track. And because the door of the microwave is so lightweight, it has a real clatter to it when it opens and closes, and that features quite a lot. But unlike the oven or the dishwasher, there was no good click, like no good candidate for the snare. And so the snare on this track is actually the on-off switch of the power socket, which you might think is a bit of a cheat, but whatever. And that's it. I personally quite enjoy not being able to tell what some sounds are on a recording, but in this case, I felt like knowing where the sounds had come from could really enhance your enjoyment of the album. So I hope that's the case. Kitchen Sink is available from Song by Toad Records. Thanks for watching.